The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. Today we're reading from DeRay McKesson's new book, On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope, which is nice. It opens with a quote from James Baldwin, "The impossible is the least that one can demand." DeRay McKesson writes, "I learned hope the hard way. It was a hot day in St. Louis County in September 2014, and I'd spent the majority of the afternoon sitting on the floor of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. At 9 o'clock in the morning, 20 of us had filed in and plopped down in 4 rows in the center of the station. The police began to gather around us as hundreds of our fellow protesters turned the corner and were now standing outside the building, demanding to get in. When it looked like the officers might forcibly remove us, everyone began to link arms, everyone but me. It was my role to record and interpret as much as possible everywhere we protested so that we could consistently tell the truth to the outside world. I sat in the front of our stacked rows, unlinked. I was trying to capture as much as I could on my phone and tweet about it in real time. I wanted to be able to tell the story of the only successful sit-in of a police department since the protests began. We were repeatedly told to move, and we refused. It wasn't long before the officer's growing impatience turned to action. I heard the screaming before I realized that we'd been completely surrounded. It all happened so fast. I looked over and saw a mother trying to stop an officer from driving his thumb into the pressure point behind her daughter's ear. And when I looked up, there was an officer standing directly over me. She told us that we needed to leave immediately. Again, we refused to move. And then she rested her hand on her taser. I'll never forget how time stopped as I watched her move her hand from her taser to her gun, almost like it happened in slow motion. Suddenly, I was on my back, gliding across the industrial floor, as an officer dragged me to the entrance of the building by my ankles. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, as a second officer twisted my arm behind my back. His face fell flat, like he snapped out of the hostility, and instead of a verbal reply, he just let my arm go, picked me up, and pushed me out the door. It was one of two moments of late when death has felt near. And when death is near, so too is the question of how? How did I get myself into this situation? Should I have made a different choice? I live off the beaten path in Baltimore City in a house that people don't wander to. If you come to the house, you have made the decision to be at the house. I've been using ride-sharing apps since I totaled my car in the protests of 2014, and I was using one on this day. I saw the car in the driveway and I paused, but I was already home, so I felt like I had to get out of the car. And when I got out, the driver in the other car got out too. And in that moment, the calmness came over me like it did in the St. Louis Metro Police Department. I've received many death threats over the years. The FBI has visited my house, cities have hired surveillance companies that have deemed me a serious threat, and a movie theater was evacuated because I received a threat that I'd be shot during a screening. But none of those things shook me like that day when the car was in front of the house after work. The driver walked toward me and I just stood still. I can't even say that I was afraid in that moment. I was still and focused, a stillness and focus that I've only known a few times. I followed his hands and body with my eyes, waiting, ready, anxious. He reached out his hand and gave me a packet of papers. I looked down and realized that I'd just been served with a lawsuit. I was sued personally by 5 police officers, 3 in Dallas and 2 from Baton Rouge. I hadn't been physically served in any of the lawsuits except this one, on the day the guy showed up in my driveway. After he handed me the papers, he asked to take a photo, and with that, he was on his way. These moments forced me to think about the why of this work, the fundamental question of whether it is worth the costs. We all know the risks of protesting, and we choose to meet them head on. There are so many times in the early months that I was met with an almost paralyzing fear. But as I watched the officer in the police station, I realized that for what felt like the first time, I wasn't afraid. It was in losing the fear of death that I began to understand faith and hope. Faith is the belief that certain outcomes will happen, and hope is the belief that certain outcomes can happen. So when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, he is speaking from a place of faith. He's confident that justice is inevitable, even if it may come in another lifetime. Faith is often rooted in the belief in a higher power, in God. Hope, on the other hand, would mean reframing this statement to say the arc of the moral universe is long, and it will bend toward justice if we bend it. Faith is rooted in certainty. Hope is rooted in possibility, and they both require their own different types of work. The work of faith is to actively surrender to forces unseen, to actively acknowledge that what is desired may come about, but by means you will never know, and that is difficult. That faith is rooted in certainty does not mean that it never wavers. Indeed, it is not a static belief, but one based on trust, and one's trust is not easily conferred. Hope is the belief that our tomorrows can be better than our todays. Hope is not magic, hope is work. I am not certain that a new world, one of equity and justice, will emerge, but I am certain that it can emerge. I've heard people speak of hope in rather different ways. The first is with statements like, I hope that we win, or I hope my loved one diagnosed with incurable cancer will somehow make it. The book, On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope by DeRay McKesson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot to go through today. There is so much happening and so much we are going to get into. In this first hour, I want to raise a few questions here. Is Trump setting up something where in the German Holocaust, or the Holocaust committed by the Germans, we can find lessons that we don't need death camps for? I'll get to that in a minute. I want to get to that. But is it time to use that word again, Holocaust? How important is history? And what are the parallels between Reagan stealing Carter's debate prep book and Trump taking stolen Democratic strategy data on Michigan and Wisconsin, among other things? I want to start with a piece that Mark Sumner wrote for the Daily Kos. It was an interesting little piece of history that I was unfamiliar with, or with which I was unfamiliar, which was that prior to the Civil War, in the years leading up to the Civil War, or in the year leading up to the Civil War, there was actually a lot of support in the North for the South simply seceding, separating itself from the Union and going its own private way. In fact, had it been put to a vote, it probably would have been approved, because the Southern plantation owners, slaveholders, had been waging a campaign in the North, a PR campaign through the Northern newspapers, had been waging this campaign to convince largely white Northern workers, working people, working class people, that if slavery was ended in the South, that the North would be flooded with freed slaves who would want to take their jobs and would work for cheaper than those people were working for. And so the white workers in the North were like, hey, let the South go, but have them keep the slaves down there. And as Mark Sumner, and I didn't realize this, as Mark Sumner, as I've mentioned before, the Civil War is not something, I'm really good on Revolutionary Era history, but the Civil War is an area that I'm certainly no scholar of. But Mark Sumner says that all changed with Sumter, which was, the first shots of the Civil War. And he said the South opened fire and shot themselves. At that point, Ulysses S. Grant, who became the great Northern general during the war and then later became president of the United States and authored a remarkable history of the United States in the process, although he struggled throughout his presidency with his alcoholism. Anyhow, Ulysses S. Grant said there are but two parties now, traitors and patriots. And I want hereafter to be ranked with the latter, and I trust the stronger party. That would be the patriots. And which is the title of Mark Sumner's piece in Daily Kos. There are but two parties now, traitors and patriots. And I think it's spot on. So let's step into the Wayback Machine, back to 1980. There was one debate in the 1980 election. Ronald Reagan only agreed to one debate with Jimmy Carter. He couldn't get out of it. His handlers were reluctant to have even one debate. They didn't even want to have one debate because Reagan was not that bright. And it's not that he was stupid. I mean, he was competent, and he was very good at memorizing lines. But they were just concerned that Jimmy Carter would eat his lunch. I mean, Jimmy Carter was the sitting president of the United States. He knew policy inside out. Reagan had been, a TV actor and a movie star and had been governor of California for a while, but... And all that changed. Well, it didn't. I mean, they ended up with scheduling this one debate. It was October 28th, 1980, which was, 2 weeks before the election? So the stakes were really high. I mean, really high. The Republicans were scared to death. Carter was going to negotiate peace with Iran. And so all this was going on. So what happens? Somebody stole Carter's debate prep and gave it to Reagan. Now, there's a whole huge debate about who did it and how it happened, and, whether was it David Stockman, was it Bill Casey, who Reagan later made head of the CIA, all this kind of stuff. But you can actually find in Stockman's files and in the Reagan Library at Stanford University's Hoover Institute, not the Reagan Library, but the campaign archives, you can actually find hundreds of pages of documents from the Carter campaign. And there are those who argue, and continue to argue to this day, that one of the reasons why Reagan did so well in that debate and ultimately went on to beat Jimmy Carter in the election, because on the day of the debate, there was an 11-point undecided, which could have swung in either direction and could have given the election to Carter as well as to Reagan, that on the day of that debate, that Reagan did as well as he did, basically anticipating every single argument Carter was going to make because he had the stolen debate book. Now, the Reagan campaign kept this secret really well. David Stockman bragged about it to a local newspaper a little after the fact, but it never got outside that local newspaper, and it wasn't until 1982 or 83 that this, June of 1983 actually, that this little obscure story popped up in a book that was published, titled Lawrence Barrett's book, Gambling with History, Reagan in the White House, that laid this out. So with that in mind, let's again step into the Wayback Machine, and only instead of going back to just before the elections of 1980, the Reagan election, let's go back to just before the election of Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. I think it's really interesting. The Reagan debate was October 28th. 1980, roughly 2 weeks before the election. This is October 31st, 2016, a little less than a week before the election. And this article appeared in the New Yorker. This is not now. This was a week before Donald Trump was elected. And I quote from John Cassidy's piece. According to the polls, Donald Trump has been trailing Hillary Clinton badly in Michigan and Wisconsin for months. In Michigan, 2 surveys taken last week showed Clinton leading by 7 percentage points. In a third poll, the margin was 6 points. It's a similar story in Wisconsin, where the last 3 polls have shown Clinton ahead by 4 points, 6 points, and 7 points. Why then, writes John Cassidy in the New Yorker, wondering, why then, with just 1 week left before Election Day, is Trump campaigning in those 2 states? Surely he'd be better off camping out in places where the polls are closer, like Florida, Nevada, North Carolina, and Ohio. The Trump campaign, though, is operating according to its own logic or illogic. In other words, he doesn't know, the journalist, he doesn't know why Trump is campaigning in Michigan and Wisconsin when there's no way he could win those states. And even the Republican strategists don't know. Asked why, back to the article, asked why Trump scheduled 2 events in Michigan for Monday, a senior advisor to his campaign told the Detroit News, quote, "Our numbers show this race being a dead heat with Hillary really hitting the ceiling in the state," end quote. That sounded like boosterism. Keep in mind, this was written a week before the election. But Trump and his coterie aren't visiting Grand Rapids, Warren, and Eau Claire just for the fun of it. So here you have, in the New Yorker, John Cassidy wondering out loud, why is it Donald Trump is going to Michigan and Wisconsin when there's no way, according to the polls, that he could win either one of those 2 states? Was it because among the documents stolen in the DNC server hack, or the DNC hack, and by the way, the FBI didn't need the physical server. They had a clone of it. You don't need to actually look at a physical hard drive. You just get, I mean, typically this is how these investigations happen, is they clone your hard drive and off they go. But in any case, they had, quote, images of it. So, but in any case, this was deflection by Trump. But one of the things that was stolen, just like the Reagan campaign stole Jimmy Carter's debate prep, in this case, this Russian invasion of the DNC stole the Democratic Party's data on 500,000 voters, on specific strategy. That would include arguments that are being made. I mean, all these things, right? And it looks like it had to do with Michigan and Wisconsin. So how is this different? I mean, are we watching the Reagan playbook? And by the way, Roger Stone was back there with Ronald Reagan. Paul Manafort was back there with Ronald Reagan. helping run his campaign. Are we watching this just like, or did we watch, rather, a year and a half ago, did we watch the Reagan's theft of the election just get repeated by Trump's theft of the election? In this case, using material stolen by the Russians? We'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And from there, I want to segue into a conversation about our use of language, particularly the word Holocaust. Stick around. And welcome back. Oh my, Helen in Claremont, West Virginia, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Helen, what's on your mind today?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to share a telephone number with your listeners to contact Congress. It's 202-224-3121, and I'll repeat it at the end of my call. I was very disappointed in Trump. That isn't the word for it. I thought his performance was abysmal at the NATO conference and the summit with Putin. Paul Ryan came out today with I believe it was Kevin McCarthy behind him. They had on identical ties, which I found was unusual. I thought maybe they were Trump ties, expressing a unity with Trump while criticizing his performance and talk over the intelligence agency.
Yeah. Trump ties are all solid colors, as I recall. But anyway.
These were red with white polka dots.
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, that number again is 202-224-3121.
Right, and that gets you to the switchboard for Congress. And if you don't know who your representative is in the House of Representatives, give them your zip code and they'll tell you. And if you don't know who your senator is, tell them what state you're calling from, and they'll tell you who your two senators are. Back to you, Helen.
Right, and you can also speak to other people if you hold on and ask for the operator. You can leave a message for Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan.
Yep.
And also, I would like to say that number again is 202-224-3121. I've been trying to call Trey Gowdy for 3 days. Unfortunately, his mailbox is full.
Mm-hmm.
But please encourage your leaders to call and express their opinions.
Sure. You got it. Helen, I often give that number out, and the other one, 225-3121. And I think one is supposed to be officially the switchboard for the House and the other for the Senate, but both of them work for both. So, yes, thank you for that, and spot on. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Got a minute here, Jared. What's up?
Yes, hello, Tom. Today also marks the 100th year anniversary of the assassination of Tsar Nicholas II. So I just want to remind any Russian autocrat out there that your time is also going to eventually come. So anyway, I want to talk about Trump, Putin, Russia, and all this. I think this is all part of a global grand conspiracy by the alt-right, or as I just call it, just fascist right, Nazi right, to take over the world. And this is part of the grand strategy. It is global domination, as we see Russia in...
If you insert multinational corporations and billionaires into that equation, Jared, and their use of race as a way of accomplishing this goal, but really their ultimate goal is economic, then I would agree with you.
Absolutely. And as we know, Hitler was put in power by the corporations, along with Mussolini. We know for a fact the corporations were the ones funding the Japanese expansion in places like Manchuria.
Yep.
And I just see this continuing.
And Franco in Spain too. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. And I think you're adding two and two together and coming up with four, and I'm right there with you. Jared, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Okay, let me just continue down this rabbit hole a little bit. We know not only was the Democratic Party's strategy for states like Michigan and Wisconsin stolen, but also that these Russian hackers got inside essentially the voting machines or the voting systems, the tabulators. And again, Mark Sumner, writing for the Daily Kos, he's coming up. He's batting 100. He's batting 1,000 today. This 29-page indictment of this woman who was a Russian agent who was arrested over the weekend, and the news came out yesterday. The woman who was basically helping the NRA funnel Russian billionaire money into the Republican Party and help Donald Trump. Page 25 of this indictment says, and I quote, I'm reading from the Department of Justice indictment. This is not part of the Mueller investigation, of this Russian spy who was living in the United States and working at the highest levels with the Republican Party, with the National Prayer Breakfast, with Ralph Reed, with the NRA, all these guys, okay? The object of the conspiracy was to hack into protected computers of persons and entities charged with the administration of the 2016 elections, U.S. elections, in order to access those computers. Mark goes on to write, the indictments make it clear that Russia was attempting to hack the U.S. into, quote, or attempting to hack into, quote, now this is, again, from the indictment. I'm reading from the indictment, quoting from the indictment. U.S. state boards of elections, secretaries of state, and other election-related entities. Mark Sumner writes, these are not just the people who control the voter rolls, making it possible that key voters might be scrubbed from crucial districts. For example, if the whether it was the Republicans doing it or whether it was the Russians doing it, or some 400-pound guy, to quote Trump, but I'm more inclined to believe the second of those three options, or the first. If they had the names of 500,000 Democratic voters, they would presumably be Democratic activists, the people that they knew were going to vote Democratic. And keep in mind, Trump won Wisconsin by what, 20,000, something like that votes. He won Michigan by, as I recall, 11 to 14,000 votes. I mean, it was fewer than 80,000 votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I think Ohio in total that gave him his victory, right? Fewer than 80,000. And one of the things that was stolen was 500,000 names of Democrats. If you simply purge those people from the voting rolls so that when they showed up, they cast provisional ballots, not even realizing that they were giving placebo ballots and their votes wouldn't be counted, you just knocked 500,000 Democratic voters off the rolls. Could that have been done in collaboration with Scott Walker? We have pictures of Scott Walker with this woman who's the Russian spy. Was Rick Snyder involved in Michigan? As Mark Sumner writes, the indictments make it clear that Russia was attempting to hack into, quote, U.S. state boards of elections, secretaries of state, and other election-related entities. These are not just the people who control the voter rolls, making it possible that key voters might be scrubbed from crucial districts. These are also the entities that tabulate the official vote. The indictment makes it clear that the Russians were successful in stealing information on at least 500,000 voters and that they successfully hacked into a vendor who sells systems, quote, used to verify voter registration, end quote. So they hacked into, because we've privatized our elections, not only do we have private for-profit corporations telling us how we voted, but we have private for-profit corporations also maintaining our voter rolls in many states. And what I would love to know is where, which states were these 500,000 people living in? And I have a feeling this is going to come out in the Mueller investigation, although, again, this is not from the Mueller investigation. Back to Mark Sumner, he says, what's now public is that Russians were sharing stolen information with Republicans both inside and outside the Trump campaign through multiple routes. Back in August of 2016, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz requested and received information from the Russians. In both August and September, the Russians contacted Roger Stone directly about the voter turnout model that the Democrats presumably were using. In October, the Russians, quote, targeted state and county offices responsible for administering the 2016 elections with a specific mention of Florida among the targets. In Florida, they sent out malware to at least 100 officials responsible for administering election results in Florida.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And now the coup de grace. The guy in the FBI who's in charge of maintaining election integrity has resigned. We'll be back. Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom. Breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this. But the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy. Literally, the top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, "The principal architects of policy are the people who own the society." In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream. So, as we're learning more and more, by the way, welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. As we're looking back at the indictment of this woman who was, via the NRA, inserting the Russians into the Republican Party, as we look at the attempts to, and it was successful, apparently, to, not even apparently, the successful attempt to hack into the Democratic Party and get all their content, then they got all this information on voters, and then there was the actual successful penetration of American voting systems around the country. And you've got Trump's national security advisor saying our voting systems are at risk. Then comes this story from the Wall Street Journal. A fellow by the name of Jeff Tricoli, or maybe it's Tricoli, I'm guessing it's Tricoli. He's the guy he was a senior FBI official, and his job was to make sure. Well, I'll just read it. This is Joan McCarter. This is from today's Daily Kos is on a roll today. Lost in Monday's Surrender Summit comes the unsettling news from the Wall Street Journal that the senior FBI official who has been overseeing the task force charged with keeping Russia out of our elections has resigned. Jeff Tricoli is off to make more money as a senior vice president at Charles Schwab. He left in June. And nobody at the FBI is giving comment as to why. But as the Wall Street Journal says, it adds to questions among some tech companies and lawmakers about how much the administration and the task force in particular are doing to protect future elections from Russian meddling. And I would add, and we need to make this point over and over and over again, if the Russians can do it, so can any dweeb that the billionaires want to hire. So can China. So could Israel. So could Saudi Arabia. So could France. So could, you pick your country, right, that has a really, North Korea. All of these countries have advanced cyber capabilities. We're not talking Hungary here. Which takes us to another piece of news that was just published today over at Vice.com, their motherboard column. And this is by Kim Zetter. Kim Zetter had written a piece in the New York Times some time back in which ES&S, the largest supplier of voting machines and voting machine systems in the United States, said, oh, we don't put remote access software into our systems, and these are like the tabulator systems, the election eligibility rolls, the voter registration rolls, these summaries of who vote, how the vote happened, who won, who didn't win, basically the final vote total. Say, oh, we would not. Are you kidding? No. Well, in response to a letter from Ron Wyden, my senator from Oregon here, he sent this letter to ES&S back in April and said, did you guys put software in these things that allows anybody to access them? And they said, yes, we provided PC Anywhere remote connection software between 2000 and 2006. Now, PC Anywhere is a product from a company called Symantec. And, it's often used by system administrators, sysops, whatever's to get access, remote access to computers. In theory, nothing wrong with that, unless there is a problem with the software, which takes us to page 2, maybe paragraph 15 of the article. In 2006, the same period when ES&S says it was still installing PC Anywhere on election systems, and by the way, many of those systems are still in use, hackers stole the source code for PC Anywhere software, though the public didn't learn of this until later in 2012, 6 years later, when a hacker posted some of the source code online, forcing Symantec, the distributor of PC Anywhere, to admit that it had been stolen years earlier. When Symantec, so now here we are, 6 years later, Symantec finally has to admit, yes, we put this software on these election computers. They took the unprecedented step. This is Symantec, not the vote counting people, the PC Anywhere people, right? The remote access to the computer software people. The ones who made the software that allows anybody who knows how to hack that software, anybody who has the source code, which had been available on the dark web since 2006. In 2012, when it finally hit the media, Symantec came out and said, well, I'll just read it again from the Medium article, or from the motherboard, the Vice.com article. When Symantec admitted to the theft in 2012, now this is the 2006 theft, when they admitted to this in 2012, it took the unprecedented step of warning users to disable or uninstall the software until it could make sure any security flaws in the software had been patched. Around the same time, security researchers discovered a critical vulnerability in PC Anywhere that would allow an attacker to seize control of a system that had the software installed on it without needing to authenticate themselves to the system with a password. So you could get into the voting computers, the tabulators. Keep in mind, earlier in the show, in the hour, I just read to you from an article that was published a week before the 2016 election, wondering out loud, why is Trump going to Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin, excuse me? Was it to campaign or was it to make something look good, in my opinion? And asking out loud, why is he doing this when he's 7 points behind in both states? There's no way he's going to win. Why is he wasting his time there? Well, now we know that these voting systems You didn't even need to figure out the password once you had this source code, which had been available since 2006 on the dark web. Around this time, and to make it even worse, around this time, security researchers discovered a critical vulnerability in PC Anywhere that would allow an attacker to seize control of a system that had the software installed on it without needing to authenticate themselves to the system with a password. And other researchers with the security firm Rapid7 scanned the internet for any computers that were online and had PC Anywhere installed on them and found nearly 150,000 were configured in a way that would allow direct access to them. They go on to describe this as non-trivial. Motherboard contacted two of the top vendors, Hard Intercivic and Dominion, to verify this, but neither responded. Professor Doug Jones, professor of computing science at the University of Iowa, longtime expert on voting machines, confirmed that other companies also routinely installed remote access software during that period of time. Certainly, he said, Diebold Election Systems did the same, and I'd assume the others did as well. In the case of Diebold, many of their contracts with customers included the requirement of a remote login port, allowing the company to have remote access to the customer system in order to allow customer support. Now, you know, there's a whole bunch of twos here laying around the ground, and we seem to be adding them up. 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10, and at what point do we get to Donald Trump is sitting in the White House? Completely illegitimately. It's time for the Democratic Party to start raising hell about the fact that our elections have been privatized. What Thomas Paine referred to as the beating heart of American democracy, well, he called it the beating heart of our republic, is the vote. That vote has been privatized? I mean, it's a horrible thing, right? It's a crime against democracy. It's a crime against our republic to privatize something like education, which Betsy DeVos and the Republicans are, aggressively trying to do. It's a crime against, the idea of a functioning society to privatize something like water systems, power systems, septic systems, and yet that's being done all over the country too. But you can't even have a functioning democracy if you have privatized the beating heart of your democracy, the election systems. And now, not only were they privatized, but the private company that did it installed software that any hacker for 6 years, from 2006 to 2012, to how many elections was that the Republicans took? Particularly the 2010 election, where they took enough state houses all over the country that they could completely gerrymander the entire United States to seize control of basically everything. They're within 2 states now of calling a constitutional convention to rewrite the Constitution. They're putting in federal judges like there's no tomorrow. How many of these things do we need to add up before, the red lights, the alarms start flashing? Oh, that's right. That's what the president's national security advisor said. Dan Coates said day before yesterday, director of national security, about our election systems for the election that we are going to have in 4 months, 5 months. And obviously, it's been that way for our election system since at least 2006, and maybe since 2002, when Congress decided to hand $5 billion to the states with the Help America Vote Act so that the states could buy these electronic voting machines from these private for-profit companies who were big donors to the Republicans who helped write the Help America Vote Act. And yeah, I get it. It was bipartisan legislation. In fact, it passed the Senate with something like 90 votes or more. I get that. But this was a huge mistake, privatizing our vote. And now apparently it's been hacked. This is incredible. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
What do you think is going on here, and how did we get here? We'll be back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I have a little bit of different way of looking at this because I've spent 25 years as an intel analyst, and I should say that I'm not a Russia expert. My only dealings with Russia was when I worked at the Abrams complex in Frankfurt, Germany, back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you something.
And then it wasn't Russia, it was the Soviet Union. But back to you. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, Soviet Union, good catch. Hey, you're right when you compare this to what happened with Reagan and Carter, except there's one key difference. All right, Russia, if Russia is helping you in your campaign, the Russian state, I can guarantee it is going to be highly precise and very scientific. And there's not going to be much bias there because they don't have any information in which to have a bias. It is going to be very, very precise. So what I think we have in America and what we all need to come to grips with is we have three main political parties. We have the Democratic Party, we have the Republican Party, and now we have the emergence of this MAGA party, which is I hate to say it, but it's true. It is a pro-Kremlin party. All right, a lot of countries have pro-Kremlin parties, especially in Eastern Europe. There's really no way around it. But what concerns me is we are going to end up putting the Russians, or the Kremlin, I should say, to be fair, we're going to put them in a position to where they are going to throw a Hail Mary pass, okay? And what I mean by that is if you look, all right, if you really look at, there's another response Republicans have been quietly making, all right? I heard a guy talk about it the other day, a Republican congressman. He said his problem with Trump in dealing with Russia is extraordinarily weak. He specifically said that Russia only has one military unit that's fully funded. He said the rest of them are lacking, like uniforms even and basic munitions, and Russia is very, very weak. Now, if that's a neocon perspective, all right, and if they start taking that, Russia, we might end up backing them into a corner because I think really all they want is to create battle space. They want room for North Korea to do an above-ground nuclear test, and they're pushing on the Golan to give room in Syria, the operational space in Syria. But if we back them into a corner, all right, this is going to get bad. I mean, and we're not doing ourselves any favor by saying our president is not subject to the laws of our country.
Yeah.
I think this is why my old bosses, Brennan and Clapper, are saying such extraordinary things.
I think you're right. And I would add, Dave, and this is, unfortunate, but I think that the backing of Russia into the corner began in the 90s during the Clinton administration with the decision to violate the deal that Gorbachev had made with George Herbert Walker Bush, that Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland would not become members of NATO and would not be militarized. And when that deal was broken, and then now Ukraine also, that was the point at which the Russians started freaking out, going, holy cow, just like we would if Canada had become a Russian resource, essentially. And which is not to justify any of this, but I'm saying there's a long history of this, and it's just gotten worse and worse. And then you go to the whole Victoria Nuland and all that stuff. Am I making sense, Dave?
Yes, you are, Tom.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's pick up some of your thoughts on all of this. Annie in Sugar Grove, North Carolina. Hey, Annie, what's up?
Oh, I just have a little suggestion to make with regard to calling the Capitol. Those operators, man, they work so daggone hard. And the woman that called that said Trey Gowdy's voicemail is always full in D.C.
Yeah.
Well, we have, we all, not all of us, but a lot of people have a smartphone. We can find their satellite offices. Like, you can find Trey Gowdy's. He's got a Greenville office and a Spartanburg office, and that's what I do.
Right.
I look those numbers up. I call their satellite offices. Sometimes it's a recording. Sometimes a live person answers, but that's an answer to the solution.
Yes, that is a good
voicemail, because my representative, who is Virginia Fox, who's a total witch, her voicemail fills up. It takes 5 calls in D.C., and each call is 1 minute. So their voicemails fill up in a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
So get your smartphones out, look up their satellite offices, call there, leave messages, talk to a live person if they answer. Some of them do. But that is one of the answers, because we have got to keep going.
Yeah. I got it, and I agree, Annie. But let's not also think that there is one silver bullet here. We can be lobbying our legislators all day long. But if we don't get our friends registered to vote, if we don't get our friends to the polls, if we can't, encourage more and more people to vote, that's really, in my opinion, our only hope. Annie, thank you for the call. You said it really well, and I appreciate your comment. What is that music? Oh, sorry. Okay. Let's see here. Carol in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I look at those 500,000 votes that they stole, and I look at what's going on now about the walk-away campaign. I coined a phrase in the 2016 election that said, we need power, and then we can look for purity. And I think that's what we have to do. Exactly what you said, get people out to vote, because they still have the information on those 500,000 voters.
Yeah. Well, and God only knows what else they have, and again, like I said, it's and I don't think this can be emphasized frequently enough. If the Russians can do it, so can hackers hired by right-wing billionaires. So can China. So can basically any country with high levels of cyber competence. It's insane that we have privatized our voting systems, and then the private companies, in order to save money, installed software for 6 years that sat there with the source code on the dark web, so that you could hack into these systems without even having to, play with passwords. It's nuts.
But do you think turnout really would help? I mean,
I do.
I'm trying to think if there's some other way we could get people to say, this is how I voted, and then be able to check that against.
It just has to be an absolute tsunami. It has to be an absolute tidal wave. As long as they can keep, look at Michigan and Wisconsin, the polls 1 week before the election were showing both states that Hillary Clinton was 7 points ahead of Donald Trump. Now that's not what the voting machines said, right? That's not what the tabulators said. And I'm wondering out loud, were the tabulators hacked? Did they get them within that 10, 15, 20,000 votes so they could say, Hillary almost won, so don't feel so bad. But it was just a little bit over. And, it's like, it's the old joke about, first place and second place. But and your point on the walk away, by the way, is an important one. And a lot of people may not know what you're talking about. There was this trending hashtag walk away, which was basically encouraging people to desert the Democratic Party for a variety of reasons. Oh, they're too wussy, or they're corporate, or they're this or that, or whatever. And some were from positions that would hey, the Democratic Party is getting too liberal, right? It's getting too much like Bernie Sanders, who would satisfy the Hillary voters. And then there were other walkaway campaigns that were like, oh, the Democratic Party is too corporate. Cory Booker takes money from drug companies, which would satisfy the Bernie kind of wing of the party. And it turns out that much of this was coming from Russian bots. And, that now we know. So, there we are. So just to clarify what you were talking about, thank you very much. Very well said. Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington. Hey, Janet, what's up?
Tom, I've been listening to your, and thank you for taking my call. I've been listening to your advice on these voting machines and the news about them and how corrupt they are. And living in Washington and you in Oregon, we're the only two states in the country that have mail-in voting. It's fabulous. The ballots come to our house. They come with a voter guide.
And we are consistently blue states. But even in Oregon and Washington, I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe that the actual tabulator software, the software that scans the paper ballots and then adds up the votes and then compiles those, is from private sources.
That is something that Congress and the Senate would have to take up, honestly, with
or the individual states. The individual states.
Scandalous thing, but don't forget that, and I'm not trying to say, both sides do it. No, please don't.
Yeah.
But I just finished reading Jimmy Carter's book on aging, and he talks about in Georgia when he was running back in the early 70s.
You got 10
late
seconds,
60s.
Janet.
Oh, my goodness. The corruption that he had to deal with from his own party.
Yeah, I've got to check out Carter's book. Janet, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. We're in this camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from Chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is Chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee met for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she has lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's talk about plain speaking. I mentioned this at the beginning of the first hour. I'd hoped to get to it in the first hour. I didn't, so I'm going to make that the basic topic of this hour. And it has to do with just saying right out loud what's going on. Donald Trump, for example, is a racist. Richard Wolff in today's Guardian. Not the economist, the op-ed writer, the commentator. He says, let's drop the euphemisms. Donald Trump is a racist president. He said, he starts out saying, a lot of people think that Trump is just crazy or there's, incoherence going on here. It's just like a random. He says, watching this pinball president ricochet around Europe, you could be forgiven for thinking there's no method to Donald Trump's madness. And then he goes through a list of things that Trump, NATO is a ripoff and Theresa May is no good. And then now NATO is very strong and Theresa May is wonderful and, et cetera, et cetera. And you go, what the hell is going on here? Well, actually, there is something that's very, very consistent. As Richard Wolff writes, immigration is where Trump's journey begins and ends. The message running all the way through this stick of rock, right? And I would add immigration and the role that race plays in that. Trump's comments while he's standing next to Theresa May about how Great Britain its character has changed, its culture has changed, and not for the better. What does he mean by that? People with darker skin are increasing their numbers relative to the white-skinned population or pale-skinned population of the UK and of Europe broadly. And a lot of them are immigrants. Richard Wolff goes on to say, Trump has mused before about how good it would be to deport people without judges messing things up. He doesn't consider his own country's ample immigration laws to be actual laws that he respects. He said, this is the language and mentality of so many extreme right and neo-Nazi parties in Europe today, Richard Wolff is writing. He goes on to say this should not be a surprise, and it shouldn't be. This is the guy who back when President Obama was elected, started and became the principal national spokesman for, and I believe as a consequence of, was given a regular Tuesday morning slot on Fox and Friends for years. I think it was 5 or 6 years that Trump was on every single week on Fox and Friends to talk about how America's first black president shouldn't be in the White House, should be removed from the White House because he was born in Kenya. The whole birtherism thing. Trump began with racism in his modern political incarnation. I mean, he began with racism back when he was a kid, when he was in Brooklyn, and his dad was a landlord, and Trump was involved with the group that if somebody came in and made an application to rent from Fred Trump, and they were black, they put the little letter C somewhere in the upper left-hand corner, I believe it was, or the upper right-hand corner of the application, and it was kind of inconspicuous. And when they saw the C, they knew, oh, it's a colored person. And of course, suddenly, the apartments were all sold out. That's where Trump started. His father was arrested in a Klan riot, and it wasn't because he was protesting the Klan. From there, he goes to becoming a wealthy businessman in New York. And when a woman is raped and left for dead in Central Park, turns out by a white guy who is a serial rapist, Trump accuses 5 black teenagers of it and whips up hysteria to the point that he's buying, I think it was a full-page ad. If it wasn't, it was huge. In any case, a large ad in the New York Times demanding the death penalty for the Central Park 5. Who were exonerated, and he continues to call them guilty. If you want to know who Trump is going after in his tweets, all you have to do is look at the color of the skin of the people he's attacking 9 times out of 10. NFL, he's going after black players. Black Lives Matter, he's going after. Members of Congress. Oh, let's find a black woman. That's a twofer. And go after Maxine Waters. I mean, this is not dog whistle. This is bullhorn. He launched his presidential campaign with this whole rant about how the rapists are coming from Mexico, which is an echo of reefer madness in the 1920s. We got to criminalize marijuana because when those black people smoke it, they can't stop raping white women. Right? These are these old racist tropes. What's Trump's second thing that he does in office? I mean, the first thing he does is he lets the coal companies dump more of their waste into the rivers. That's sure going to help the average working person poison their children with their drinking water. Second thing he does is he pushes through his Muslim ban. Oh, did you notice most of those Muslims he's banning have darker skin than, for example, Donald Trump does or I do? And now he's unleashed ICE, this deportation force, on anyone who even looks remotely Latino. And now they're going back through people who have become U.S. citizens, naturalized U.S. citizens, to see if they lied about anything, so they can remove their citizenship and deport them retroactively. And I guarantee you he's not starting with the Norwegians or the Germans or the Irish immigrants. I guarantee you. I don't have the proof, but I would bet anything. Which brings me to a piece written by one of the leading experts on the Holocaust and on genocide studies. He's a historian. He's a lecturer at the University of Virginia. His name is named Waitman Wade Bourne, B-E-O-R-N. And you can read his piece in today's Washington Post. And the headline is Parallels Lie in Authoritarianism, Racism, Ethnic Myths, and Dehumanizing Language, Not the Final Solution. And the argument that he's making in this article, and it's a really brilliant article, and I strongly encourage you to check it out in today's Washington Post, is that, yes, when people speak of the Holocaust in the United States, typically what we're talking about is the Holocaust, the so-called final solution, which began in 1941, the murder of the Jews, and the trade unionists and the communists and the gays and the gypsies and ultimately even some of the Catholics, but principally the murder of the Jews. But he says, take that out of the equation for the moment. And I realize that's difficult to do, particularly if you're Jewish, but there was more going on between 1933 and 1941. In fact, there was very little, killing of Jews going on outside of the work camps like Dachau. It was not a death camp, it was a labor camp. Sort of like privatized prisons, only, much more extreme. But anyhow, he said there's no reason that historical comparisons between what is going on right now in this country and around the world with this hard swing to the right and the Nazis. He says there's no reason that historical comparisons must immediately center on the final solution, the murder of Jews. The Nazis themselves did not begin with that solution in mind. He said genocides and dictatorships, for that matter, don't just spring into existence. They begin incrementally. First, authoritarianism. I alone can solve these problems. Then racism. Oh, it's the Mexican rapists. Then ethnic myths. These people are animals. And dehumanizing language. He said this is where Holocaust comparisons can and should be made. And I'm making them right now. The Nuremberg race laws. Now, these were the laws in Germany that said that if you had a certain percentage of Jewish blood that you couldn't be a German citizen any longer. The Nuremberg race laws were based on an earlier version employed in the colony of Germany in Southwest Africa called Namibia. Hitler himself looked to Roman antiquity, I'm quoting from the article in the Washington Post now, as a partial inspiration for his planned intentional starvation policies in Eastern Europe. He called the Spanish conquistador Cortés a moderate man. Cortés, of course, engaged in genocide in the northern part of South America. Adolf Hitler referred to Thomas Jefferson's Indian removal policies, which were genocidal, admiringly, and he called the Volga River our Mississippi. This is Adolf Hitler saying the Volga River is our Mississippi, where inferior races must be driven. Hitler further stated that, quote, natives of Eastern Europe should be looked upon as redskins. Right? America engaged in ethnic cleansing and massive genocide. We can too. Hitler admiringly commented that America, using racist guidelines, had, quote, established specific criteria for immigration in an attempt to maintain racial purity. And it was true. And it's what Trump is trying to bring us back to. So he says you don't have to begin in 1941 to find these parallels. In fact, it's important not to, but to look at the beginnings. How does this stuff begin? And then you ask, where does it go? Right? But how does it begin? So when I come back from the break, I'm going to go through some of the how is it beginning, again from this fellow's article in today's Washington Post. And to give credit where credit is due, the title is Parallels Lie in Authoritarianism, Racism, Ethnic Myths, and Dehumanizing Language, Not the Final Solution, by Waitman Wade Bourne in today's Washington Post. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what are the parallels? Stick around. And welcome back. Morris, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. Hey, Morris, in Long Beach, California. What's up?
Hey, Professor, here we go. I'm running for president, everybody. Donald Trump, he got him a base. I'm going to get me a base. Okay, here we go. No, if you make less than $1 million in this country, you're not paying no more income taxes. I'm going to give you free health care. I'm going to give you free education, okay, and nobody's going to go to sleep hungry at night. I wish somebody would ask me how I'm going to pay for all this.
How are you going to pay for all this, Morris?
I'm so glad you asked that. Okay, there's a little bit of, about the Panama Papers, there's a little bit of money over there, but remember when the Swiss got busted and had to pay a $3.2 billion fine because they were housing some money over there, and people were hiding their money over there so they wouldn't have to pay taxes on it? Here's what I'm going to do, Professor. I'm going to pull a Putin. Let me tell you what Putin did. He told those oligarchs in Russia, if you don't bring your money back over here and put it back in this country, I'm going to find it and I'm going to take it from you. And that's what I'm going to do, and that's how I'm going to finance my new society. We're going to make America great again, everybody. We're going to eliminate the billionaire class. We're going to go back to when Paul Getty was the only guy that had anywhere near $1 billion. So anyone that criticizes my program or doesn't think it's going to come to pass, they're one of the people that's got some money over there in Switzerland.
Yeah, and by the way, it wasn't just Putin. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, effectively the ruler of Saudi Arabia right now, because the king is, febrile. He did the same thing. He brought all the oligarchs into the whichever hotel it was, one of the fancy hotels there, and locked them down and said, bring your money back to Saudi Arabia and give me a piece of it.
I'm not crazy, Professor.
I think you're onto something, Morris. I wish you well. Keep us up to date on how the campaign is going. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Comrade, is another glorious day in Trumpistan, is it not?
Indeed.
Listen, I think I can effectively prove collusion. You ready for this?
Sure.
All right. At first, Trump was, there was no hacking. And then later on, he backed up and said, well, yeah, there was hacking, but it wasn't the Russians. And then he backed up and said, well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yesterday, we found out that Trump said, gotten everybody, listen, Russia, thing to say, listen, Russia, if you can hack those 30,000 emails, you'll be doing everybody a big favor. And they did it that day.
That's correct.
That's not causation. I don't know what is. That is collusion.
Yeah, that goes way beyond correlation to causation, I think. And I mean, if you were running Russia and you did not like Hillary Clinton because of her position on Ukraine and other things, and the Republican candidate for president said, hey, help me out here, publicly, right in front of America and the world, what would you do, Chaz?
How are our grandfathers not spinning in their graves having full Cold War for an entire generation? You remember duck and cover.
I do. Yeah, I do. And where are the Republicans? I mean, this is bizarre. Chaz, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you, and I do appreciate it. Wow. In just a second, we're going to be hitting a break. In fact, here it comes right now, and I'm going to get back to what's going on right now. Stick around. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. So, first, Professor Bourne, he's a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, or historian and lecturer at the University of Virginia. He's the author of a book called Marching into Darkness, The Wehrmacht and the Holocaust in Belarus, and the author of a book titled The Holocaust in Eastern Europe at the Epicenter of the Final Solution. First of all, he lays out the argument that, yes, we should be talking about the Holocaust and drawing comparisons between the Holocaust and today in the United States. That in doing so, we should focus not on what happened after 1941, that is the extermination camps, but instead everything that happened between 1933 and 1941, in that intervening period, when Germany went from being a functioning democracy to becoming an authoritarian dictatorship. And then he points out Trump's he says, Trump, as a presidential candidate, explicitly made appeals to violence during his campaign. This is something Hitler did. He said it's useful to focus on the early periods of the Nazi movement, the rise to prominence. Trump's well-documented use of dehumanizing language is another clear similarity to the early stages of Nazi rule. His toleration of modern Nazi groups in the United States, epitomized by his relativist blame on both sides comment, indicates that the history of the Holocaust and the Nazis must continue to be part of our critique. The Nazis who descended on Charlottesville screamed blood and soil. It was the same racist slogan that was used by Hitler's followers in Germany. He said politically parallels to those of the early Nazi movement, they're all over the place. He says, in fact, he says, as Evans rightly notes, his propaganda machine would be immediately familiar to Joseph Goebbels' Nazi office. And I would put Fox News, frankly, into that. The recent executive order, he writes, making administrative law judges political appointees subject to executive power, cannot be seen as anything less than an attempt to bring the courts in line with Trump's political ideology, with the administration's political ideology. The Nazis called this Gleichschaltung, or coordination. Even in his management style, Trump has similarities to Hitler. Like Trump, Hitler was reluctant to surrender too much authority to any one subordinate, and so his cabinet was a den of backbiting and maneuvering underlings seeking the support of Hitler, who was the only one who decided policy. And if you don't think that Trump's cabinet has no say in policy, look at what happened yesterday in Helsinki. I mean, just his his advisors, his defense people, his intelligence people, the members of his cabinet, and his senior intelligence, they had all laid out this plan. Here's, you're going to take on Putin, and here's how you're going to do it, blah, 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 blah. And boom, Trump went nuts. Trump went off on it. And then he says, this is real stuff. By the way, we're gonna do a, I'm going to unlock the lines, Walter, Arthur, I'm sorry. We will do this later on. Back to this. He says these historic comparisons are not hyperbolic. He said John Fitzgerald, a GOP congressional candidate in California, stated live on the radio that, quote, everything we've been told about the Holocaust is a lie. He went on to receive 23% of the primary votes cast, making him the Republican candidate for the House of Representatives. This is not an isolated event. In Illinois, Holocaust denier Arthur Jones won the Republican primary for the state House. The most prominent conservative challenger for Republican Paul Ryan's seat from Wisconsin is a white nationalist and an anti-Semite. After all, he writes, the historical Nazis did not seize power illegally at first. They were elected. We need to learn the lessons of history. We'll be back with your calls on this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what do you see? What are the comparisons that you see, and how best do you think we should fight back? I think we just need to mobilize a massive vote. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with the Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to contradict or counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, "The captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs." Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down, and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All of our conversation in the previous hour about voting machines and the insecurity of our election systems and the beating heart of democracy, to paraphrase Thomas Paine, and all of that. One of our listeners, Dorothy, sends a note to the Oregon Election Commission's online Twitter account. It's at Oregon Elections, and asks the question. Says the New York Times says 25 states use an ES&S DS200 that can be easily hacked if it has a cellular feature. They don't know which states use this cellular feature. What optical scanner does Oregon use? And the Oregon Board of Elections tweets back minutes ago. Actually, no, this was about a month ago. Sorry. So, but it was just brought to my attention just now by Dorothy. None of Oregon's tally machines use cellular. They are all secured in a county office with security cameras and are on a closed network within the elections office that is not connected to the internet. And that's the magic phrase. Again, I would like to see these be boxes that are owned by the state, and they may well be, running software that is developed by the state on an open source basis, which I'm pretty sure is not the case. But anyway, a lot of stuff here to unpack. Kathleen in Avondale, Arizona. Hey, Kathleen, what's on your mind?
Well, I called to say that I called my senator, which is Senator Flake, and told him that I appreciated the fact that he made a strong statement, but that I needed more than words. He has said a lot of words, but I needed a little more than that. I needed some action. And I also spoke to Senator McConnell's office and said basically the same thing.
Yeah.
That I thought that his performance in Helsinki was appalling, and that he didn't stand up for America, and that he needed to do something, action, not words. And regarding the election, you know, I live in Arizona, and our election system was hacked. And so I don't know if they have our information.
Well, and the other thing we don't know is from 2006 to 2012, during that 6-year period, there were three elections, three major elections, and you know, how many of them might have been altered in what states and in what ways. We have no idea. All we know is that the Republicans are now in charge of everything.
I know, and I'm really concerned about how secure our votes are. We do have mail-in ballots here, but they still get scanned, and I don't know how they're tabulated.
Right.
You know.
Right. And
I know they're scanned in. I don't know.
There should be an absolute federal law against privatizing elections. It should just be that simple. We should have gone down the road of privatizing elections. When we did this in 2002, it was insane, and all of a sudden we started seeing this magic thing called redshift, where the exit polls said the Democrats won, but gee, wasn't it a surprise the Republican candidates actually were the ones that the voting machines said we all voted for. And this has been going on since 2002 in a big way, and you can easily Google this. There's not even a secret. So, yeah, spot on. Kathleen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Richard in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, I'd like to know if so many people believe that Putin has something on Trump. And from watching that fiasco yesterday, I was wondering if it's possible to subpoena the only two other people in the room were the interpreters.
Correct. And those interpreters typically make notes while they're doing their interpreting, so that if there's any question from either party later, and those notes, to the best of my knowledge, are not subject to subpoena because this took place in Helsinki. Although I'm really no expert on this, Richard. It's possible, because it was the President of the United States in his official capacity as President of the United States, that under the Presidential Records Act, that there has to be some, I don't know. And we also know that Donald Trump doesn't necessarily, follow the rules or obey the law, shall we say.
Well, you see, I think that the Congress can subpoena. And that the fact that I remember
Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are not going to do that, Richard.
I know they're not going to do it, but we could raise the issue and bring the subject up so that it becomes part of the national dialogue or debate.
That's a good idea, and I think that's already happening. And frankly, the way to do this is if we can get enough people to the polls in November to get Democratic control of at least the House of Representatives, then they will have the power of the subpoena. And whether they can subpoena the translator notes or not, I frankly don't know. I hope to find out, or I intend to find out. But they can subpoena a heck of a lot of people and information that might give us a lot of insights into this. Richard, thank you so much for the call. There's another point that you mentioned, which is, what does Putin have on Trump? And, my personal theory on this is that it's not the PP tape. I don't think that Trump cares if they're, if Trump hired a couple of prostitutes to urinate on the bed that Barack Obama and Michelle Obama had slept in a couple of years earlier in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel or whatever it was, I'm pretty sure it was the Ritz in Moscow. I think, frankly, if that tape were to get out, his base would be even more enthusiastic about it. What? A couple of, white hookers peeing on the beds that America's first black president slept in? If that was true, and I'm perfectly willing to think that it's true that he hired it and had it done, whether or not the Russians have the tape or not, I don't know. But even if the Russians do have the tape, I don't think that's what they're blackmailing him with. I don't think they have to blackmail him. I think that because of his multiple bankruptcies, because he's such a terrible negotiator and such a terrible businessman, his failed steak company, his failed board game company, his failed parts of his failed clothing company, his failed casinos, his failed bottled water company, his failed airline, I mean, it just goes on and on. His failed college that was convicted of fraud. Because he's such a terrible businessman and negotiator, Donald Trump, and therefore ended up with a half a dozen bankruptcies or thereabouts, Donald Trump could no longer borrow money in the United States. And if you're a real estate developer, you can't do business if you can't borrow money. So he turned to oligarchs around the world, to billionaires around the world, and said, hey, you want to invest some money in my operations? I'll pay you a good interest rate. You can get some real estate. You can launder money. You can launder ill-gotten gains through Trump properties. And he got into bed with some really sketchy people of the billionaire persuasion who were not Americans. And many of them were Russians. And I'm guessing, given that Eric Trump back in, I think it was 2013, said we don't need to take money from American banks anymore. We get all the money we need from Russia. This is his son who was in charge of making it happen. I'm guessing that if the Russian oligarchs, who have to, they have to respond to Putin. Putin runs the country. He can change the laws. He can take away their money. In fact, he's done it. He can put them in prison. In fact, he's done it. There are Russian oligarchs, billionaires that Putin has put in prison. If the Russian oligarchs were to say to Trump, we want our money back right now, Trump's entire business empire would crumble. It would be the end of Donald Trump. It would be the end of Ivanka and Eric and Don Jr. No more big game, hunting trips to Africa to kill giraffes and elephants. No more, Ivanka having her own line of clothing and accessories made in China. No more Trump hotels. No more golf courses. Nothing. Donald Trump and his family would become homeless and penniless, in my opinion. Now, I do not have the kind of evidence that you would need to write a piece for the New York Times about this. This is my gut. My gut is that the reason he won't reveal his tax returns is because without that Russian billionaire money, he would be broke and penniless and homeless. He would lose Mar-a-Lago. He would lose everything. And so he's literally fighting for his life, or what he perceives to be his life. He's literally fighting for his lifestyle when he's sucking up to the Russians, in my opinion. Now, again, I could be completely wrong on this, but I think that, follow the money was Mark Felt's advice to Bob Woodward, Deep Throat's advice. Mark Felt, the #2 guy in the FBI, said, follow the money. That advice, in my opinion, still holds. And I think if we were to follow Trump's money, and I believe that Robert Mueller is doing that right now, we're going to find out that without Russian help, Trump is broke. He's busted. He's nobody. He's nothing. And that's what he was trying to protect. He was trying to protect his family and his business and his reputation as a brilliant business, as a very stable genius. I don't think he was worried about a PP tape getting out. As I said, if he could survive the crotch-grabbing tape getting out, which is far worse, at least in the eyes of his supporters, the PP tape is nothing. So, anyhow, let's hit a break here, and I shouldn't have done that, because we've got
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit
TalkMediaNews.com
for audio and
coming
video
up.
archives.
And welcome back. Let's see here. Al in Weston, Texas. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Tom, I was going to talk about Helsinki, but after your discussion about Mr. Bourne, Professor Bourne, it'd be great if you could have him on in terms of going a little further in depth and what he sees as possible maneuvers, tactics, routes that we can take to kind of hinder, if not stop, this progression of fascism.
That's a very good suggestion, Al. That's a very good suggestion.
And one of the things, what it comes down to is after that, I was talking with a friend of mine who lives in Palm Beach, and they pretty much openly use the Nazi word regarding him.
Palm Beach is where Mar-a-Lago is?
What it comes down to is everyone always says invoking Hitler and Nazism is you lose the battle. There's no other frame of reference considering the pattern that has progressed from going back to the early 2000s to where we are today. You cannot use as a frame of reference just fascism. This is Nazism. Everyone who's listening to you in the world, in Europe, in the Pacific Rim, really, really need to take notice about what is going on here. What happened in Europe, the breaking, he definitely wants to pull out of NATO. I wouldn't be surprised if he kicks out the United Nations in the next 2 years if he stays in office. We are essentially becoming Hitlerland. We are becoming a Nazi state.
Well, we're becoming, I've got a caller, I think his name is Chaz, who regularly calls and says, you know, another fine day in Trumpistan. We're becoming Trumpistan.
And what it comes down to is that anyone, Mitch McConnell, any senator who, even though they hate him, back him, they're Nazi sympathizers.
Yeah.
And there's no ifs, ands, or buts anymore at this point. I could easily see the Supreme Court becoming essentially what I just talked about with Henry VIII and the Man for All Seasons. He's creating a star chamber which will go after any kind of political enemies, political rivals, as he and the party see fit. It is no longer a conservative party. It is no longer a Republican party. It is a Nazi party. It is MAGA party. It is Make America Great. His going to Helsinki was essentially to get more marching orders from Putin, and whatever transpires in this country, if not the world, in the next few months, if not years, is definitely part of the Putin plan for essentially
so here's the question
Soviet Union arising.
Pardon the interruption, but we've just got 40 seconds here. Here's the question. I've been reading, and I'm still only about halfway through it. It's a slow read of Fritz Tyson's book, I Paid Hitler. He was the leading, he was the Charles Koch of his day in Germany in the 1930s, and he funded the rise of Hitler. And at what point do you think that the industrialists, the billionaires, the Mercers, the Kochs, the Adelsons, and a whole bunch of them whose names we don't know, but they're there, at what point are these business people going to say, you know, we thought we were just installing a guy who was going to make us richer? Oops.
When America completely collapses, because at what point did Thiessen say we made a mistake? Did he say that while Hitler was on the ascendancy, or did he say it when Germany lost?
He said it when the war with Russia started. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's halfway through, so maybe there was enlightenment. But then again, Thiessen was maybe a more reasonable man compared to Koch.
As far as I can tell, like I said, I haven't finished his book, but you know, that's the question in my mind. At what point are these billionaires going to do the forehead slap and go, oh my God? Anyhow, we'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. And Arthur, I can't put Luke on until you let go of him. Arthur? There we go. Okay. Luke Vargas. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Great. Where are you?
I'm in Helsinki still.
Still are. Okay. So what's in the news?
Well, let's shift away from here, unless you've got any pressing questions to sort of follow up on what happened yesterday.
I think it's been well covered by the news.
There are two things I've been watching. The first is an interesting story coming out of North Korea, where we have seen now in the pages of the country's main propaganda newspaper today a 9-page spread complete with photographs in which Kim Jong-un methodically disparages the state of economic development in one of the country's northern provinces named North Hamgyong. And North Korea watchers that I've talked to have said this is quite unprecedented, that the central propaganda organs of the country would be airing so much dirt from their leader on the status of the country. And let's just let me give you some of the highlights. There's, I think they're kind of entertaining in a way, and then we can talk about their broader importance. But he goes to a hotel, a resort that's been under construction for 6 years, and there's not even plaster on the walls. And there are photos of him looking at sauna or soaking tubs, and he says they're filthy. People shouldn't even, wash their clothes in these, let alone be in them. He goes to a bag factory, what is intended to be kind of a state-of-the-art production facility, and he complains about the thickness of the foam on the straps and goes to a power plant that's been under construction for 17 years and is not even finished yet. And there are a few really interesting things here. I know it may sound like kind of a mundane story, but the first off is that this is in a province in northeastern North Korea that borders China and Russia, and is one of the least developed in the country. It's also been a place where there's been unrest through the years, the poorest area, and that leads to that unrest. But I think as you sort of start to dive in here, there are two possible explanations for this. One is that Kim Jong-un is preparing for some sort of purge, right? He needs some sort of excuse to point to say this whole cadre of people has been asleep on the job and they need to be removed from their posts, or worse, depending on how punishment is dealt out. And the alternative is that this is and kind of why I think this is an interesting story, is it sort of reveals that even a country like North Korea is not a monolith. That even though we see continually video of Kim Jong-un going and touring various facilities and people obviously under coercion being forced to applaud and cheer for him until their hands are sore, that this country is not a monolith, that there are parts of this country where political leadership is not entirely controlled by Pyongyang, and where leaders in some areas, especially when they're not getting any visits from Kim Jong-un, sort of fall asleep on the job. That, much like the Soviet Union before it, during the Stalin era, it's like you can have a strong-willed leader who is notorious for dealing out harsh punishments, but that doesn't mean everybody does their job absolutely perfectly. And I think one bit of analysis here is these people, because it was such an embarrassing province, because there has been unrest there in the past, these people simply said, look, Kim's not going to be coming for several years. We're just not going to progress in development enough. And maybe this is the result of Kim's engagement with the world now, that he is starting to think more about market reforms, trying to figure out ways to improve the North Korean economy, and is applying a little bit more of a critical eye back on his country now that he's seen, especially how other sort of authoritarian leaders manage their own economies.
Like Singapore.
Don't necessarily need to be in ruins. What do you say?
Like Singapore and China. I mean, he went to both those places in the last year, and they have both just, Singapore, not as recently as China, but both of them have exploded under this combination of authoritarian governance and capitalism, for lack of a better word.
Sure, and I will point out, I'm probably will agree with those who say this is not a sign of a major purge to come, because there are actually some, he's quite critical in these pieces of what's called the OGD in North Korea, which is equivalent to those who know Stalin, Soviet Union, in which you have the NKVD, sort of the central organ of the party that is tasked with sort of carrying out the will of the leader. And in any other circumstance, you sort of see a leader criticizing that central organ, and you say, oh, there's a political risk there, right? This is Kim Jong-un criticizing the people in the government who have probably the most eyes and ears on the people and who are listening to everything, that's a pretty big enemy to pick a fight with. But it could be a sign that Kim's in charge still, back in Pyongyang. Now he's willing to get a little bit more critical as he reaches out around the country. So again, maybe kind of a nuanced story compared to what we had, the big high-stake, obvious diplomacy here in Helsinki, but I find it interesting. It shows that this story about economic development in North Korea will certainly be playing out, and we'll probably get a lot more like this.
It's fascinating. You said you had another one you wanted to share?
Yeah, I will just mention, everybody knows the old adage that, when the government says some policy is going to pay for itself, and economists criticize that in the moment, they're usually right, that those projections are overly ambitious. This is a new independent audit by the British government finding that the campaign promise of Brexiteers that there would be a Brexit dividend, a multi-billion-dollar a year windfall for public finances in the UK. Well, the audit finds that's not going to happen. In fact, they have taken this $13 billion that they're going to save on payments annually to the European Union. It's already been appropriated to many other causes, and because the tax base is now going to be lowered after Brexit, there's no Brexit dividend for the United Kingdom. In fact, it appears they may be digging themselves into a fiscal hole. Anyways, the Brexit promises continue to fall far short of what was offered up.
This is going to be a fascinating one to keep an eye on. Luke Vargas, you can follow him at The Courier over on Twitter, and the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. Have a good time in Helsinki. It's a beautiful city. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Crisis Without End. This is a collection of essays about nuclear power compiled by Helen Caldicott and edited by Helen Caldicott. I'm reading from the introduction, which she wrote. She is the world-famous Australian pediatrician, physician who has been speaking out about nuclear power and whatnot for years and years. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck off the east coast of Japan. Within days, the ensuing tsunami had induced the meltdown of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the earthquake, the external power supply was lost to the reactor complex. The pumps that circulate up to 1 million gallons of water per minute to cool each reactor core ceased to function. Emergency diesel generators situated below the plants kicked in, but these were soon swamped by the tsunami. Without cooling, the radioactive cores in units 1, 2, and 3 began to melt within hours. Over the next few days, all 3 cores, each weighing up to 100 tons, melted their way through 6 inches of steel at the bottom of their reactor vessels and oozed their way onto the concrete floor of the containment buildings, a fact that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the power plant operator, continued to deny for months after the disaster. At the same time, the zirconium cladding covering thousands of uranium fuel rods reacted with water to create hydrogen, which initiated hydrogen explosions in units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Massive quantities of radiation escaped into the air and water, 3 times more noble gases, argon, xenon, and krypton, than at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986, and huge amounts of other volatile and non-volatile radioactive elements, including cesium, tritium, iodine, strontium, silver, plutonium, americium, and rubidium. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. The Japanese government considered plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo as other reactors, including 4 at Fukushima Daini, several miles along the coast from Fukushima Daiichi, were also at risk. Meanwhile, thousands of people fled the area around the smoldering reactors, but they were not notified when the radioactive plumes were traveling, despite the fact that there was a system in place to track the plumes. As a result, people fled directly into regions with the highest radiation concentrations, where they were exposed to high levels of whole-body external gamma radiation, inhaling radioactive air, and swallowing radioactive elements. Administering inert potassium iodide to the exposed people would have blocked the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid glands. Unfortunately, it was not supplied except in the town of Miharu, where there was a conscientious mayor. Prophylactic iodine was, however, distributed to the staff of Fukushima Medical University in the days following the accident, after extremely high levels of radioactive iodine, 1.9 million becquerels per kilogram, were discovered in leafy vegetables near the university. Iodine contamination was already widespread in leafy vegetables and milk, while other isotopic contamination from substances such as cesium was widespread in vegetables, fruit, meat, milk, rice, and tea in many areas of Japan. Fukushima disaster is not over and will not end for many millennia. The radioactive fallout, which has covered vast swaths of Japan, will remain toxic for hundreds of thousands of years. It cannot simply be cleaned up, and it will continue to contaminate food, humans, and animals. It is unlikely that the 3 Fukushima Daiichi reactors that experienced total meltdowns will ever be deassembled or decommissioned. TEPCO claims such a massive undertaking will take them at least 30 to 40 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, predicts that it will be more than 40 years before any progress can be made because of the dangerous levels of radioactivity at the damaged reactors. This accident is identical to the Chernobyl catastrophe in its medical implications. The Fukushima meltdowns will induce an epidemic of cancer as people ingest radioactive elements. The single meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl contaminated 40% of the European landmass. Already, according to a 2009 report published by the New York Academy of Sciences, over 1 million people have perished as a result directly of that catastrophe. Large parts of Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds of years, as will now be the case in Japan. In assessing the impact of the Fukushima disaster on Japan and on the planet, and in assessing the safety of nuclear power overall, it is imperative to understand and evaluate the biological and medical consequences of exposure to the kinds of radioactive elements that were released during an accident at a nuclear power plant. Fact 1, no dose of radiation is safe. Each dose received by the body is cumulative and adds to the risk of developing malignancy or genetic disease. Fact 2, children are 10 to 20 times more vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of radiation than adults. Females tend to be more sensitive than males, while fetuses and immunocompromised patients are also extremely sensitive. Fact 3, high doses of radiation received from a nuclear meltdown or from weapons explosions can cause acute radiation sickness, including hair loss, severe nausea, diarrhea, and bleeding. Reports of these illnesses, particularly among children, appeared within the first few months after the Fukushima accident. And then it goes on, the types of ionizing radiation. Crisis Without End by Helen Keller.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Hans Nichols is tweeting, just in, Rod Rosenstein was summoned to the White House today. Now, I'm going to read the last sentence of the tweet first, and we have Craig Aaron's on the line with us. We're going to pick up Craig in just a second, but I have to share this story with you. The last sentence of the tweet is Donald Trump is still in the residence. In other words, he's still upstairs in the White House. He's still watching TV. That's what he does in the residence. He talks on the phone to Sean Hannity and he watches TV. Donald Trump is still up in the residence and has not shown up in the West Wing this morning. This was tweeted at 11:44 a.m. Eastern time. That would be about 3 hours ago. 2.5 hours ago. Rod Rosenstein was summoned to the White House today, 4 days after he indicted 12 Russian intelligence officers. He was seen leaving the White House at 11:28 a.m. Unclear if he met with President Trump, who is still in the residence and hasn't showed up at the West Wing this morning. So there's a couple of possibilities. Perhaps perhaps John Kelly or one of the other senior members of Trump's staff or cabinet who are involved in national security, who are facing a chorus of calls to resign from the Trump administration and leave this traitor behind. Perhaps one of them wanted to sit down with Rod Rosenstein and say, hey, you're overseeing the Mueller investigation. Is there enough dirt here that Trump's going to get impeached? Is it time for me to bail out? Should I leave a sinking ship? Another possibility, one of those same people, or more than one, sat down with Rosenstein and said, we're over it. Trump screwed us in Helsinki. He gave it all up to the Russians, and that's it. And how can we help? We would like to participate with the investigation. That's a possibility. Third possibility, Rod Rosenstein got fired this morning. Now, Trump never fires anybody himself. He likes to do it on television. It's an act. In real life, he's afraid to do it. He's a coward. He's a bully. And bullies are typically cowards. So another possibility, Rosenstein got fired or got told that he's going to be fired, or the process was set into place. We don't know. We don't know what's going on here. Another possibility, Trump said, hey, I'm seeing on the news here, finally Fox News is starting to report it, that I looked like an idiot in Helsinki and that Putin isn't always a nice guy. Can you tell me what's going on? What are you learning about, Russian interference in the elections? I doubt that's the case because I don't think Trump is that curious or that thoughtful. But God only knows. I just wanted to flag that for you. I'm guessing it's something that we'll be talking about tomorrow. On the line with us is Craig Aaron. He is the president and CEO of Free Press and Free Press Action Fund, the website freepress.net. And you can tweet him at @NotAaronCraig. Craig Aaron, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Tom.
Great having you with us. I wanted we originally were talking about the FCC and the Sinclair mega merger that may be dead as a consequence of some comments that Ajit Pai has made. But breaking news today, a Republican has finally signed on. This is Representative Mike Kaufman, who represents Colorado's 6th Congressional District. And the number for the Congress's switchboard, 202-224-3121. If you want to, A, thank Congressman Kaufman for taking a stand, or B, encourage other Republicans to do the same, he has added his signature to the discharge petition to force Paul Ryan to allow the House to vote on something the Senate has already voted on, which is to overturn the repeal of net neutrality, which I realize is a double negative, but they need 218.
Works sometimes.
Right, they need 218 votes to do this. He becomes the 177th. It's going to take some more Republicans and apparently some more Democrats. Where are we at on that? And let's start there.
Yeah, well, you described it well, Tom. And today Mike Hoffman becomes the first Republican to step forward and put his name in the House, first Republican in the House, put his name on this discharge petition that could force a vote on net neutrality. And That's a big shift in momentum. There has been a partisan divide on this issue, and so the willingness of Republicans to rebuke a Republican FCC chair, Mike Hoffman, has now opened the door. So we're increasingly optimistic, and largely because this was a result of pressure from his district. He's a congressman who's in a tough re-election fight in a purple district, and he was hearing from his constituents week after week, even when he said specifically when he went on a trip to Iraq to meet with soldiers and Afghanistan, that young soldiers were telling him how important net neutrality was. So he got the message. He is a congressman who had spoken out against what Ajit Pai did back in December, but this is a big step forward in him adding his name to the congressional resolution, the Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval. And it makes me optimistic. I mean, we do have a number of votes still to get, but we're at 177. There are a handful of Democrats who are still not on the bill, and then most of the Republicans, now with the notable exception of Mike Hoffman. But once that door is open, it's been our experience that others will follow. We saw that in the Senate, where we already passed a bill against very long odds to overturn what the FCC did, and several Republicans crossed the aisle to support that measure. So we're going to be pushing all month long and throughout the summer, whatever it takes, to try to move more Republicans to the right side of this issue. And it's a good one for them to get on because it's vastly popular. 80%. More than 80% of Republicans support net neutrality, and even higher percentage of Democrats and independents. This is a winning issue for politicians. They're beginning to recognize it, and it also has the added benefit of being the right thing to do.
And the way to phrase this, help me with this. It seems to me that the thing to do is when you call 202-224-3121, the telephone number for the House of Representatives switchboard, and you say, my zip code is, 93042. Who's my representative? And they say, oh, that's Earl Blumenauer. You say, please connect me. They connect you to the office. And I'm sure Earl has already signed on. He's a good guy, but whatever. I'm just pulling examples out of my left ear here. But when you are connected to that congressional office, what you would want to say is, would you please tell the congressperson or the congressman or woman, would you please tell my representative to sign the petition, the discharge petition, to force Paul Ryan to hold a vote in the House of Representatives about whether to support net neutrality, whether or not to support net neutrality. Would that be the easiest way to say it?
Yeah, they should. Yeah, you want them to support the Congressional Review Act bill on net neutrality.
Right. I'm just concerned about too many words that people don't know. It's just
So just those three, though, I think are the key: Congressional Review Act, or CRA, as they call it up there, on net neutrality. We want them to support, or they can say Mike Doyle's bill. That's the lead sponsor. Mike Doyle's bill to reverse what the FCC did on net neutrality.
Right.
I
but the reality is
every office has gotten thousands of calls, and they will definitely want to hear yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that if Paul Ryan would simply allow a vote right now, this would pass. It passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. It will pass the House. It's just Paul Ryan has to allow there to be a vote. This is all about getting around Paul Ryan. And so you might want to call Paul Ryan's office, too, and say, what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the committees as well that are blocking this. I mean, the fact is that this bill, which is vastly popular, supported by the vast majority of Americans, can't get a vote in the House because the Republicans don't want to vote on it. So that's why we've had to go this route of the discharge petition. But we saw in the Senate where this route it was able to go around the traditional blockades in the Senate. That, again, when they were forced to vote, Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike all supported this bill because they knew where their constituents expected them to be. I believe that's true in the House, too, and all the members of the House, they face a choice. They can be obstructionists here. They can continue to block and support this terrible decision by the Trump FCC, or they can move forward with this vote, restore the protections that we all expect. And if they don't do it, no question, this is becoming an issue that people are taking with them into the polls and the polling booths, which hasn't been true before, but it's definitely true now. And members of Congress all across the country are hearing about it in town halls. They're hearing about it when they're walking down the street. Net neutrality is now one of those issues, and Congress should be, and I think we're seeing today, is paying attention.
Yeah, amen. Real quick, Craig, what's the deal with the Sinclair merger?
Well, I'm almost surprised to be here with good news, but I actually have some, which is yesterday, again, against all expectations, the Republican chair of the FCC, Ajit Pai, no friend of the public interest, did something good. He issued a statement saying that he was not going to sign off on the Sinclair Tribune merger at this time, and he was going to do something called designating it for a hearing, which is sort of like at the FCC. It's kind of like when you tell your kids that the family pet went to live on a farm. You know, once something's designated for a hearing, it doesn't tend to come back, which is not what we expected to happen on Sinclair, but that deal is now in real trouble. It's not dead yet. There could be further negotiations, but the indications are that Sinclair spent so much time misleading the FCC, setting up shell companies, trying to find ways to hold more and more power over local TV, that even the Republican FCC, which had been its best friend, even they got fed up with it and are now throwing this deal into jeopardy, which is great news for the public, and I think a result of the kind of public pressure we've seen, especially in the last 3 or 4 months, when people finally figured out, wow, this Sinclair company is really dangerous. They're pushing right-wing views. They need to be stopped. Yesterday, it looks like they might actually be stopped, and that's good news.
Or at least slowed down. Craig Aaron, the president and CEO of Free Press and Free Press Action Fund. FreePress.net is the website. You can tweet him at @NotAaronCraig. And Craig, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Always appreciate it.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. And welcome back. Oh, interesting. The breaking news, Trump is going to speak soon. I wonder if that has to do with Rosenstein. It's gay. Or if Trump is resigning, maybe he's going to say, nah, screw it. I've had too much of this. I need to go back to being a billionaire. That's it. I'm out of here. I think that that's actually a very real possibility. We'll see where this all goes. Judy in Denver. Hey, Judy, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, one, Trump and family made $500 million last year. But the other...
How do you know that?
It was reported, I think, on NPR.
Huh. Okay.
One of the news things mentioned it quickly. But our election system, what a lot of people don't understand is they have a computer program that counts the votes. That program is owned by the Republicans. Nobody's allowed to see it. Nobody's ever been allowed to see it, except the owners. It's considered proprietary.
Yep. It's just that there's not one it. There's 3 or 4 companies involved in this. 2 of them, the 2 largest, which are what used to be the 2 largest, Diebold and ES&S. Now you've got Hart, InterCivic, and these others. But those 2 companies were very, very deeply enmeshed in the Republican Party. Back to you.
Yep. Yeah. The owner of Diebold was Bush Jr.'s top guy in the re-election.
Ohio, in the state of
Ohio. But we need to go, Democrats need to demand that this election be paper ballot and hand counting. That's the only way we can be assured that we have a legitimate election.
Yeah, well said.
And I'm afraid they won't even bother. They haven't done anything about our election.
Hey, it's working out well for the Republicans. They like what's going on, and that's why you're not going to see that kind of change. I'm with you. I gotta move along. But thank you very much for the call. Yep, James in Spokane. Hey, James, what's up?
Tom, I wanted to speak to the terrorism that gets so much lip service today. In most cases, they're talking about the overt and violent terrorism, and not enough attention, if any at all, is directed at the financial terrorism, which is affecting more people by a factor of 1 million, I'm supposing.
You're talking about kids graduating from college, $70,000 in debt?
Yeah, and the whole financial scheme of the oligarchs. They're depriving and bankrupting the world. People are driven to suicide. Like I say, it's at least a factor of 1 million compared to the violent terrorism.
Yes. And we're seeing, radical increases in suicides here in the United States now. We know from the study that was published by the BBC back in 2002 under the headline "Suicides Increase Under Conservative Rule" that literally for a 100-year period, they looked at the period from 1901, as I recall, from 1901 to 1998, and during that period of time, whenever the Conservatives were in power in the UK or Australia, they looked at both countries, suicides went up, and whenever the Liberals were in power, suicides went down, and it's because of that what you're describing as economic terrorism. I wouldn't quite use that language, but I'm certainly not going to disagree with it. So,
hey,
yeah.
One more point for you about these madmen in the Middle East. You think it has something to do with the burqas and restricting the oxygen in the women and the pregnancy?
No, I don't think so. But I do think it does have something to do with being born into crisis and conflict. When women throughout their pregnancy experience stress, their body becomes filled with a hormone called cortisol, which causes a developing fetus to develop more musculature and more hindbrain reaction and less forebrain, thoughtful brain, regulatory brain. So you end up with more violent, bulkier people. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Boy, what a fascinating day and what a whole lot of news there is out there. John in Madera, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Oh, hello, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I was just going to comment that I watched a broadcast last night on KMTH 26 News, which I believe is a Fox affiliate owned by Sinclair. And I think up to 47 minutes, maybe I didn't watch the last 10 minutes, but I saw no mention of the top story of the day regarding President Trump and the Helsinki summit.
Wow. Yeah, MSNBC has been gleefully playing clips from Fox Business of a couple of commentators and a host criticizing Donald Trump. But nobody watches Fox Business. I mean, they are not pointing out the 3-hour opinion block in the evening that Sean Hannity is the star of, that has just been giving him tongue baths. So, yeah, I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the call. Dr. Laura in Chicago. Hey, Laura. Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Hey. Yeah, so a couple things about the election. There was a caller that called in and you said as long as they're not, the electronic machines are not attached to the Internet. Well, all of the vendors, they go in and they program the ballot styles on these machines, and so at that time, they're all connected to the Internet.
No,
so
I think a lot of those are done by flash drive.
Yeah, flash drive. But what I'm saying is that they can introduce malware and
flash. Yeah,
at that time.
I mean, there was a patch that was done in Georgia, and in the 2002 or maybe it was the 2004 election. It was whatever the election was where Max Cleland lost, and I think it was Sonny Perdue won. And both in the governor's race and in the U.S. senator's race, the results of the election were an absolute mirror image of what the exit polls and the pre-election polling both showed. They both showed the Democrats winning by, I think it was 2 points in the Senate and 4 points in the Senate and 5 points in the governor race. They both, the exit polls and the pre-election polls both showed the Democrats winning by that margin, and that was the exact margin by which the Republican candidates won. And that patch had been applied using flash drives just before the election. And
Bingo.
yeah.
Bingo. So just being not connected to the internet is actually not safe enough.
Yeah.
So, and then I want to encourage everybody. We're Clean Count Cook County. Clean Count Cook County. What we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have on our page, you can take action and then hit nationwide, and I've outlined all of the steps and all the information people can, links where people can go if they want to develop an election integrity group in your county.
That's great. What's the website again, Laura?
Yeah, it's cleancountcookcounty.org, and you hit take action and then nationwide, and I have all the steps, all links, people you can contact for help, and we would be happy to help anybody that was pulling up an election integrity group in any county. We would be happy to answer questions as well.
Sounds great. Okay. Good luck with that, Laura. Keep us up to date. Thank you for the call. George in Brookdale, Connecticut. Hey, George, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for making the important point that others can hack these things besides the Russians. You just never hear that.
There's literally not just one, boogeyman out there or whatever the phrase is. But yeah, I don't get why the media doesn't get this. How is it? It's like you think Russians are the only ones on Earth who have these kind of capabilities. Now, that's not to diminish what Russia apparently, and I would say fairly clearly did based on these indictments that we've seen and the level of the granularity, the detail. What they did was terrible. But, anyhow, I cut you off, George. You want to make a quick point? You got about 10 seconds. I'm sorry.
No. Well, I just wanted to refer people to John Conyers' report after the 2004 election. And he recommended reform and investigations, and the Democrats never did anything on that when they had control from 2006 to 2010.
Yeah, ouch. George, thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Amazing. I'm just looking at some of the headlines here on Think Progress. Man killed by Chicago police was trying to show officers his gun license when they blindsided him. Here are all the Republican leaders and conservative activists. Maria Butina, she's the now in jail Russian spy, met with, and it's a picture of her and Wayne LaPierre, and it says, and is this the unnamed American who helped Russia infiltrate the NRA? Paul Ryan uses extremely as dubious talking point to downplay Russia's attack on U.S. democracy. And then this from Media Matters, Zachary Pleat writing over at MediaMatters.org. Fox News, which is overtly friendly with the NRA and regularly hosts its representatives, has so far devoted minimal coverage to the arrest of the alleged Russian agent. This is the woman who was apparently collaborating with Wayne LaPierre to bring the NRA in as an asset for the Russian Federation inside the Republican Party. They say Fox anchor Shepard Smith covered the story when it first broke yesterday, and Fox host Shannon Bream spent a couple minutes discussing it on her late-night show. This morning, Fox did not even mention Butina or the NRA today until its noon show outnumbered, according to Snapstream transcripts, even as CNN and MSNBC both covered it on multiple shows last night and this morning. Fox has just, I mean, they have become they've become state media. You know, they've just, it's mind-blowing. So, Annie in Dodge County, Wisconsin, listening on WRRB. Hey, Annie, what's up?
I've been thinking of this ever since I saw it, and today you made you were making connections between Mr. Trump and Nazis. And I go along with you. I try not to watch all the new violent shows and everything like that, and I found old shows like the Early Edition show. I don't know if you ever heard of that, where the guy gets the newspaper for the day ahead.
No, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, it's a really sweet show.
It's on Netflix?
Pardon?
It's on Netflix?
No, I don't have anything. All I have is over-the-air TV.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're watching reruns. Yep.
Oh,
So
yes,
anyhow,
yes,
you wanted to talk about how Make America Great Again, MAGA, has older roots than we thought.
Yes, and on one of these shows, he has to battle some Nazis, whatever, that are having a march.
Right.
And there was a sign. I don't know if this was early 90s or so, but in marching in the group, one of the people was carrying a sign saying, "Make America Great Again." And I thought, oh my gosh.
I'm wondering if the word "again" was missing. That was the official slogan of the Reagan campaign in 1980, was "Make America Great."
Oh, maybe. I don't know. But that's what the Nazis were marching and carrying in this TV show.
That's very interesting. Yeah, the Nazi slogan, Deutschland über alles and all that kind of stuff. But the American Nazis in the 40s was America First. That was their slogan. And the America First movement was basically don't let the Jews who are fleeing Europe come into the United States. Among other things, but it was a kind of a pseudo-American Nazi movement. Fascinating stuff. Annie, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the call. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening to the program. Leslie in Oak Park, Illinois. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you very much for the platform for people to talk. Let's make this very simple. I agree with all the things that they've been saying about paper ballots only, but what you have to remember is paper ballots only can be swapped, so we have to have, and I'm speaking as having been a judge of election and equipment manager for many, many elections, you have to have the election judges initial the paper ballots to make to make them authentic.
Yeah, authenticate the ballots, in other words.
Right.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
Have this in Cook County, our clerk is saying that, we're going to have ballots that could be printed out, and then people can just look at them to make sure they're right, and then they'll go through the other machine to read them and do the tally thing. But if they're not initialed in between, they can be swapped, and the results can be changed.
Good point, Leslie. That's a very good point. Thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. Glenn in West Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just had a question for you. I'm just curious to why the Democratic Party never said anything about the Russian collusion or the Russians manipulating the system until Hillary Clinton lost. And I recall Obama making a comment about Donald Trump saying something about that. He said, you just need to put your work boots on and go to work and win the election fair and square, Trump. He said it was a joke if the Russians were trying to manipulate the system. I very distinctly remember that. Well, how come that's not being brought up now?
Glenn, what do you think happened?
Trump won the election fair and square. Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate.
Okay. So you don't believe the FBI and the CIA and the National Security Agency and the U.S. military, Army intelligence, Navy intelligence, Air Force. You don't believe our own intelligence systems.
Okay.
Glenn, I'm curious. If I'm genuinely curious here. I'm not trying to debate this with you. I'm trying to understand something. Who told you not to believe the U.S. intelligence agencies?
Pardon me, I understand what you said.
You said that you don't believe the U.S. intelligence agency, that you do believe Vladimir Putin. I'm wondering who told you to think that way.
Because using common sense. You know, that's why Trump was elected, because we're tired of the military. I mean, not the military, but the government lying to us about stuff. And let's go back and look at.
So Trump's the government, but he doesn't lie to you, but the rest of the government does? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. And how do you know this?
And it seems to me like you would agree with that, because you seem to be pretty much anti-government yourself. You seem to be a socialist.
Glenn, how do you know that that's? How do you know? How do you know for sure? I mean, do you have a feeling or a picture or a voice in your head? How do you? And I don't mean that like, you know, you're crazy or anything. I'm not trying to suggest that. I mean, how do you know for sure? You know, with that level of certainty, you sound absolutely convinced of this, that Donald Trump won fair and square, that there were no shenanigans with the voting machines, that the Russians didn't hack anything, that the ads that were on Facebook had no impact, that it's all because Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate. How do you know that? Do you recall somebody saying something, or do you remember a picture of something that, you know, how do you know?
Well, let's see. If there's any evidence to prove this, let's see the evidence.
Okay.
All I've heard is allegations against, no evidence. Show me one shred of evidence that this is true, that Trump colluded with the Russians. Show us some evidence. If it's there, then I'll believe it. But I've been hearing all these people accuse him, but there's no evidence. And if he did do it, then why isn't he being prosecuted for it?
Right. I'm guessing, Glenn, that you don't read the New York Times, the Washington Post, you don't watch CNN or MSNBC?
I do watch them, yes, because I like to get a round view of everything.
So haven't you seen the evidence?
One side or the other. Pardon me?
Haven't you seen the evidence?
No, they haven't given any evidence.
They just indicted. They just indicted a dozen. You know, so far they've indicted 25 Russian intelligence officers, and the last indictment, you know, explicitly said, okay, they hacked into these election systems. They, you know, I mean, these indictments that have been delivered.
So you're saying that they went in there and redid the counts. The Russians went in there and redid the system and did the counts for us.
I don't know if that's true or not, Glenn, and I'm skeptical, but I am concerned that I live in a country where that would be a possibility. Aren't you?
Well, let me ask you, why did our president at the time, Obama, get up there and make the comment that it was a joke that the Russians were trying to manipulate the system? Why did he say that?
Obama never said that. Obama did not say it was a joke. President Obama actually said it was.
Yes, he did. No, he did not. He did say that. I'm 100% sure. I went back and watched the video last night of him saying that. He said, Trump, put your work boots on, go to work and win the election fair and square, and stop talking about Russia.
Glenn, I'm sure you saw a video of Trump saying something like that, but
no, it wasn't Trump. It was Obama.
Excuse me, Obama saying something like that. I'm sure that there's probably something out there that's been pulled out of context in some way that seemed logical to you, but the reality is that President Obama, when he handed the White House off to Trump, and in fact, you know, I mean, both of them were briefed. This was even during the campaign; they were both briefed that the Russians were trying to get into our elections, and you know, affect and influence our elections. And Obama has been very serious about this. I mean, you know, one little video in which, well, you know, apparently you're willing to construct your entire, or that's just reinforcing your worldview. Glenn, you know, thanks for the call, and you know, for not going berserko at me. It's always nice to hear from the other side. I think it gives us all a little insight into how people are thinking these days, at least Republicans. Marie in Plainfield, Illinois. Hey, Marie, what's on your mind today?
Sir, I've been listening to you for about 10 years, and I am reaching my 92nd year. And I have to get this out to you. Sunday's Tribune, Chicago Tribune, had a huge article on where the children have been relegated to. Mm-hmm. And they are in a pretty nice-looking building. I can't recall the name of the building, but we are spending something like millions of dollars to take care of these 2,000 children that have been kidnapped. Let's say they were kidnapped.
Yeah.
And when they're kidnapped, we should put through a class action suit and sue the living daylights out of.
Yes, and one of those companies that Betsy DeVos owns a piece of is charging $700 a night to take care of these kids.
That's right. Why are we doing that to children? that were kidnapped. Now, legally, I would say they were kidnapped, and legally, we could put through a class action suit and sue Mr. I will not call him my president.
Right. I call him Donald Trump. it's enough. Marie, I think your points are really, really well made, and I sure hope that when I'm 92, I'm as sharp as you are. That's great. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for the call, or actually for watching us on Free Speech TV. Marie, thank you. Great to hear from you. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. And welcome back. Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Actually, Larry, you're listening on a commercial radio station. They're in commercial break. I'm going to put you on hold and pick you up after the break. Hang on just a second here. Sorry about that. John, who is listening on Progressive Voices in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Tom, I said this. I called in a few months ago, and I mentioned this. I just don't see any way around going with public ballots. I just don't see any way, because as long as there's a secret, there's going to be a way around it. I want a ballot that has my name on it, has my phone number. If the media wants to call me and verify my ballot, fine. I really don't see any other way, because even back in the days of paper ballots, there were shenanigans. We know it.
Yeah.
And the only way to beat the lies.
The problem with a secret ballot versus a public ballot, and I've seen both. I mean, I lived in New Hampshire for 5 years and went to a town meeting, and you stood up to vote, right? All in favor, stand up or raise your hand. And everybody knew how everybody voted. And the upside of that is that it's pretty transparent and there's no ambiguity. The downside is that we have a dynamic in our society where in many parts of the country, in most parts of the country, in fact, I would argue, for example, men have power over their wives, parents have power over their children, employers have power over their employees. People are caught in power relationships, and those people who are less powerful than those who have power over them could be punished, or rewarded for that matter, for the way that they vote, if it's publicly known. And that was the main impetus, because we went from more public elections, in many cases, in early days of our republic, to private ballots and private elections through the 1900s, was to give people the ability to vote in ways that their employers might not like, for example. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, but Tom, the only way for the majority of us who aren't influenced by those sorts of things to have confidence in our system is to have public ballots.
But don't you think about 90% of people have somebody in their lives who has some sort of, sword over them?
Listen, I'm in a union. My boss knows my political stand on union.
Sure.
Right? You have to be able to stand up to people. Otherwise, you will be walked on.
Oh, I don't disagree with that sentiment at all, John, but I'm not sure I see what that has to do with public voting.
Idea, right? If we all had to vote in secret to join unions, would there be any unions?
Well, you do have to vote in secret to join a union.
No, you don't.
Yeah, we had an NLRB election when I was working at Clear Channel, and then the vote was to end the union, unfortunately. But, it was a secret ballot vote. I've been through one.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the votes to create and to end unions have to be secret ballot.
Our system can have integrity without having publicized ballots.
Yeah. John, I'm not totally pushing back on you here, and I think there is some merit to what you're saying, particularly in small communities in the old, New England town model. town meeting model. But I don't think it's a panacea. But it's something that's worth discussing. John, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back in just a minute. It's 10 minutes before the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Oh, welcome back. Larry in Asheville, listening on the Revolution in Asheville. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, the Democrats, and maybe along with Greens and other parties that can get on the ballot, have got to get back control of both houses.
I agree.
It's imperative to stop the. We need FDR, like you've always said, but now we've got the RDF, the rolling dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And I worry that this constant focus on Russia, how it flipped the election, is not going to bring over the swing voters. I think their eyes may be rolling back in their heads at some point.
Well, if they're watching Fox News, they're not even hearing this stuff. I mean, it's just only, for example, the Russian agent and the NRA. That stuff has been only minimally mentioned on Fox, as Media Matters has documented in excruciating detail over at MediaMatters.org. So I'm with you. It says here you also wanted to talk about demonizing Russia?
Exactly. It leads to the point of the libs and progressives, some of them, a lot of them, because of their disgust with Trump, which is understandable, have demonizing Russia and using the word Russia and forgetting that part of the shenanigans that the Russians are up to really goes back to us pushing NATO way into Eastern Europe. And there are thousands, if not millions, of Russians who would love to see Putin gone.
Yeah, I agree with all those points, and I think that the idea that Trump has been selling, which is that we should have reasonable relationship with the world's second largest nuclear power, is a good one. In principle, and if it can be done effectively in practice, you just don't want that country messing in your elections, and you want to push back when they do. And they've got some, I think, what I know they believe are legitimate grievances against us in our behavior in Ukraine, in the Baltic states, and in Poland. And we have what I think are legitimate grievances now against them, particularly with regard to election manipulation. This stuff should be worked out. But Donald Trump didn't go over to Helsinki and work it out. Donald Trump went over to Helsinki and gave Vladimir Putin a shoe shine, shall we say. And so, yeah, spot on. Thanks a lot for the call, Larry. It's good to hear from you. And I appreciate your calling in. Ronald in Tallahassee. Hey, Ronald, what's on your mind today?
Hello, sir. I'm 68. I'm sure you remember John Lennon.
I do. Well.
There's a whole book called The Murder of John Lennon by Fenton Bressler. It details how the CIA and the FBI killed him. There's a book called On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. It details how the CIA and the FBI killed
Ronald, I'm real familiar with Jim Garrison's book. Lamar Waldron and I wrote 2 books about that topic, and I can tell you Jim Garrison was wrong. And I don't know about the book saying, but there are our intelligence agencies
you were asking the gentleman, where is the CIA? Are you cut me off again?
No, I'm still here.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You were asking the gentleman, where is the proof that the CIA or something to the effect?
No, I simply asked him, you know, why do you not believe the U.S. agencies?
There's oodles of proof that the CIA and the FBI does dirty things, and now you have to take into consideration how many people have the CIA and FBI killed, how many people has Trump killed.
Yeah, well, if you're looking at, you know, in the Middle East, he's killed a lot. And,
okay.
you know, but with regard to the CIA and the FBI and all that kind of stuff, yeah, they have you know, Ronald, you got to let me finish a sentence once in a while too.
Okay.
They do, in fact, have a fairly sordid history. I mean, look at the FBI's history just with Martin Luther King, among other things. I mean, you know, the FBI has done some terrible things in its past, and you know, so has the CIA. Look at their involvement with, you know, these regimes in Central America that are now melting down in front of us because of our involvement. But that doesn't mean that today, when all of our intelligence agencies in aggregate get together and say, hey, here's the evidence, here's what happened, and a judge in a court of law says, you know, yes, I will hand down an indictment based on this evidence. That's pretty compelling to me. You know, that's pretty compelling to me. I'm, you know, and yeah, enough said, I think. Bill in Chicago. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, that John Lennon murder, that was the most, you know, well-witnessed and documented murder. No CIA. It was one nutball killed him. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right, Bill.
Yeah, that's not why I called. That guy who was talking about Obama said something about Russia and forget about Russia. That caller completely conflated that. What he heard, what he should have heard was, Trump kept saying, it's rigged, it's rigged, it's rigged. And Obama was calling back on that.
Okay. Thank you for that. I was wondering what video clip he could possibly be talking about, and that makes perfect sense. Bill, thank you for answering, you know, my question of our conservative, you know, our hapless conservative, you know, it's, I'd say clueless, but I don't want to insult him. But get a clue. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow. Keep your eye on what's going on in the White House. There's something big cooking right now. And don't forget, democracy requires you. It's not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com.